Story 1. A tornado was approaching my Amtrak train. We passengers watched it destroy a barn about 30 feet away as it continued towards us. The conductors ran up and down the aisle, shouting. The tornado struck our tracks just seconds after the last car passed. Timing is everything. Story 2. When I was in elementary school, I would get off the bus and go straight to the backyard to play with my dog. One day, I came home to a rabid dog. I didn't know what rabies was yet, and it was a pretty early stage, so she was just lethargic and confused. I tried to play with her, but slowly, some survival instinct in me started taking over, telling me I needed to get inside the house immediately. I don't know if I just remember it this way or if the eyes of rabid dogs really do turn red, but I do remember her staring at me silently with those huge red eyes. Story 3. I couldn't have been any older than 5 when this happened, so I'm not clear on the details. I do remember being on a road trip with my family and stopping at a rest area. There happened to be a man and woman there as well. They spoke Spanish and we spoke only English. Somehow, we all managed to communicate through smiles, laughter, nods, and gestures. They were both very friendly. I have no idea whether they were a couple or related in any way. We watched as they walked away to rejoin their group, both climbing into the bed of a pickup truck. As the driver pulled away and headed to the freeway entrance, my dad made a remark about not liking where they were sitting due to the danger. We merged back onto the freeway as well, with a few other vehicles between us and them. Just a few very short minutes later, my parents were yelling, and my dad was applying the brakes. I looked up to see bodies flying. Over 40 years later, my brain's need to protect itself has blocked out the details of what exactly occurred. But the pickup driver apparently took a blind curve too fast and came up on another vehicle. The driver either hit the brakes or swerved to avoid a collision. The man and woman in the bed of the truck were ejected. I overheard my dad telling someone that the woman had been split in half. We have never stopped at that rest area since, and I used to always close my eyes when we approached that stretch of the highway. Story 4. In high school, I came home from school and found my mom in a puddle of blood in the bathroom. It was everywhere, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I couldn't get her to wake up, and her pulse was weak. I called emergency services and paramedics came and got her. She had had a colonoscopy that morning, and they removed a couple of polyps. In a healthy person, polyps of that size don't require cauterization, but my mom has von Willebrand disease, a clotting disorder. Even a simple fall that wouldn't hurt you or me could cause her to bleed out internally. I'll never forget walking into that scene and seeing her completely gray and barely breathing. I had no idea a human could lose that much blood and still survive. This was almost 20 years ago now, and she's doing fine, thank goodness. We were so grateful at the moment that she was still with us that we never pursued any kind of legal action, even though the doctor who performed the procedure refused to admit a mistake was made and even accused her of taking blood thinners. My goodness, her blood is thin. It's in all her charts. Story 5. My wife was resuscitated after a crash while being placed on life support. She had turned purple from a lack of oxygen. She passed away 9 hours later. Story 6. I was working overnight remodeling a Staples store. I was in the inventory closet when I saw a man get electrocuted by an alternating current breaker box of approximately 1400 volts, just 6 feet away from me, until the panel blew out and knocked him off it. He was on fire. I put him out with an extinguisher. He had burns on 70% of his body. Fortunately, we were in the one town that had the top-tier burn unit in the state. He made it to the burn ward and survived the initial burns. However, he went into heart failure from the electrical side effects and passed away. I can't enter any Staples without smelling it. Story 7. I was at my desk doing paperwork in the small warehouse where I worked back in 2006. I heard a woman screaming for help in the woods behind our building. I grabbed a tack hammer on the way out the door and ran toward the sound. There was a man on top of a woman, choking the life out of her. I started striking the man on the head until he fell off. Seeing the blood run out of his cracked skull is still something that keeps me up at night. She was a person he hired and decided to murder instead of paying her. Story 8. My sister was in the intensive care unit a few days after giving birth due to organ failure from a highly preventable infection she contracted during delivery. I kissed her and she felt cold. Story 9. I was passed by a motorcycle traveling at least twice my speed on a highway. A mile or so down the road, I encountered a debris field consisting of various motorcycle parts, along with scratches and scuff marks on the pavement. Cars were stopped and people were running to the left side of the road, where the motorcycle was wedged under a guardrail. Further up the road, perhaps 30 feet away, lay a man under the guardrail with his hands on his helmet. I ran to help, and that's when I noticed his dismembered legs, about 20 feet further down in the grass. He was alive, conscious, and talking. He said he couldn't feel his legs, which suggested he had suffered a spinal cord injury. A nurse and 2 military personnel were there. They applied belts to his legs to help prevent him from bleeding out. Within a couple of minutes, they had him loaded into a pickup truck and sped off to the hospital. News reports later revealed that, against the odds, he survived. Story 10. I found a friend dead from an opiate overdose. I can still remember how silent it was when I walked into the apartment and immediately knew something was wrong. It's amazing how silence can be deafening. I left a local swimming hole and heard a crash, coming upon a child who had just been hit by a car while riding his bike. This was over 20 years ago, and I can still remember the sounds and screams from the child's parents. I can still picture the round body-sized crater smashed into the car windshield. Another memory is from when I was 10 or 11. I was walking through a train tunnel that was a little over a mile long with my uncle. A train hadn't come through in years, and when we got about halfway, which was the darkest part, we heard the train whistle and the train approaching. It was a wild experience to see a train barreling toward us, and my first instinct was to run, even though I knew I couldn't outrun it. We had to jump to the side of the tunnel and make ourselves as flat as possible. It was so loud and windy as the train passed so close to us. Story 11. My son was born and did not breathe for the scariest 15 minutes of my life. He is now a perfectly healthy 22-year-old who towers over me. Story 12. Watching my dog die was heartbreaking. He started off looking dizzy and unable to stand, leaning slightly. He eventually passed away while lying on his side, making a running motion and crying out in pain. Story 13. I was taking a patient home from the hospital. We opened the door to her room, and her place was a complete mess. There was a deceased man on her bed. Story 14. I watched a woman get out of her car without putting it in park, and it rolled over her. She was okay, though. Story 15. My face after falling asleep driving ended up face down in a ditch. The doctor stopped counting stitches in my face at 250, and my right eyelid had to be sewn back on. I saw a dog run across a 4-lane road in front of a motorcycle and get ripped in half. On my way to work, I was the second person to arrive at the scene of a motorcycle rider who had hit a pothole and was thrown from his bike. Even though he was wearing a helmet, his head hit the mailbox post and snapped his neck. Story 16. I am not sure if it is the scariest experience, but I was visiting family when my cousin and her boyfriend were driving us somewhere. The boyfriend needed to stop by a family member's house who had just undergone an orthopedic procedure, possibly a hip replacement. We rang the bell at her house, but no one answered. After a few more attempts, we became worried because she was recovering and unable to go anywhere. We walked around the house and looked into the large front window. The aunt was sitting on a couch, appearing to watch television. We knocked on the window multiple times, but she did not move. In short, she had passed away and remained frozen in time, sitting on the edge of the couch. My aunt, who is an emergency room nurse, arrived shortly after. She explained that it is not uncommon for older patients undergoing procedures such as knee and hip replacements to experience clotting issues and suffer strokes. Story 17. When I was trying to stop someone from being beaten to death, one of the attackers pulled out a large knife. I have never experienced a feeling like that. Story 18. When I was in middle school, probably in 6th grade, my grandpa and I went camping in the woods behind the house. My dog ran into the woods after something, and we heard a howl. Grandpa picked me up, left the camping gear, and took off on the four-wheeler. As we rode away, it was the first time I had ever seen wolves, and they were not happy. Story 19. I would have to see a brown bear's face right next to mine, chewing on my arm, doing my best to stay still. I still remember the little black spots on her canines. When she released my arm, I remember seeing the blood on her jaw. I had dreams about that image for a good 11 years before I finally got therapy. It made her look like a literal demon, but she was just doing what bears do. Story 20. When I was 5, my little sister died of meningitis shortly after falling ill, and the doctors were unable to help her. It shocked me, as children are not supposed to die, especially those younger than me. I had to grapple with the concept of mortality and my place in the world, becoming comfortable with the reality that I could die at any moment due to circumstances beyond my control. Story 21. Coming back from the bathroom at the daycare where I was working in college, I saw one of the children choking silently. I had already asked his parents not to send Cheerios because he didn't have teeth yet and would stuff them in until his cheeks were full if he wasn't watched. I told the older lady working there not to give him any, but she did. I don't remember if I had any CPR training at that time. My instinct was to run over and stick my finger down his throat. He threw up Cheerios all over my hand and started crying. Then I began crying and yelling at everyone who hadn't listened to me. The second incident was a couple of weeks ago. I got off work, and it was raining heavily. Suddenly, a man stepped in front of me, waving to stop, and I barely missed hitting him as he had just been struck while crossing the street. I turned on my hazard lights, and we all stopped traffic and called for help. Watching that poor man flail and moan, and seeing the top of his head look like mush was overwhelming. Story 22. Oh Lord, you know I have suppressed this for a long time. I was 19, working at Subway overnight, and was outside smoking when I saw a lady get struck by a car. She flew out of her shoes and slid across the ground while the car kept going. I went to help her while on the phone with emergency services, and her face was just gone. I blacked out and came to, screaming, while the firefighters were trying to calm me down. I didn't even realize I had vomited on myself until I caught a whiff of it. For 12 years, it has just sat dormant in my mind until right now. Story 23. 1. A woman suffered a severe leg injury after being run over by a pickup truck in front of my house. I helped save her life, and we are good friends now. A large moose followed my husband and me on a trail in Jackson Hole while we hiked the trail after the first thaw of the season. This time marks when animals wake from hibernation and start their mating season. The moose was about 10 feet away for the entire mile it accompanied us on our walk. Rangers had not yet been out on the trails. I do not recommend this experience. Story 24. A deceased individual was involved in a car accident and suffered severe injuries, resulting in extensive damage to the skin on their face and arms. It was a traumatic experience for me when I was around 8 years old. Story 25. 2 large dogs were charging at my dog and me. I ended up scooping her up, trying to kick them away, and I ended up peeing my pants. I was 21. Story 26. My daughter, when she was 3 hours old, was taken for surgery to repair a closed valve in her heart. She was the darkest blue I had ever seen. She was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome and lived for 5 hours. Story 27. Waking up and seeing my son standing over me at 2 a.m. nearly made me consider an exorcism. When he was younger, if he woke up in the night, he wouldn't wake me but instead would just stand there until I opened my eyes. Story 28. The neighbor across the street killed his girlfriend. We didn't witness the actual killing, but we saw the attack before he dragged her back into the house. The sudden lack of screaming is forever ingrained in my mind. Story 29. A fight broke out outside a liquor store. My sister, cousins, and I were getting drinks after dinner. A man mistakenly thought a woman was a prostitute and tried to solicit her. She did not take this kindly and ended up stabbing him. The man threw a chair that was left outside, which hit a tree and shattered into pieces. I was about 5 feet away when the wood flew right past my face. Eventually, they began hitting each other with pieces of wood from the chair, and we all decided it was the perfect opportunity to leave. The police were called, but we don't know what happened afterward. Story 30. My mother died from a heroin overdose. I received my eviction notice. My former bosses were facing felony charges. Story 31. Watching my newborn struggle to breathe, and the doctor saying he might not make it, was incredibly heartbreaking. He did make it. Story 32. The shadow of my fiancé standing in the hallway looking at me at 2:10 a.m. said, "Hey, I know the time because I was confused about why he was up since he works at 6 a.m. I was watching South Park when I noticed him, looked at the clock, and asked why he was up. When I looked back, he was gone. The terror that filled my bones when I heard him snoring loudly in the bedroom just 3 feet away, and the fact that there were no sounds of him walking back to the room, sent me into panic mode. The floors creaked so badly in that house that you couldn't go 2 feet without waking up the ancestors around the globe. It was one of many things that happened in that rental." Story 33. I am an intensive care unit and emergency registered nurse. I have seen things that humans are not meant to see, but something that happened recently truly scared me. I discovered my friend's husband is on the sex offender registry. We all hung out recently, and I learned he is guilty of harming a child. I have children around the age of his victim. I had no idea. The scariest part was that he seemed normal and so likable, and my friend stayed with him. This occurred during their relationship, and she has told no one. I accidentally came across his picture on a sex offender location website. It really affects me how you can think you know someone, and how people make excuses for their partners who do not deserve that grace. Story 34. A childhood friend invited me to sleep over. She didn't tell me that she sometimes fell asleep with her eyes open, showing only the whites. Story 35. I was staying at my friend's house a few years ago. We were both 19 or 20, and it was her first home with her infant son. Since it was just the two of us in this new, unfamiliar house, we felt a bit uneasy. We were in bed, laughing at videos when my friend suddenly stopped, locked her phone, and stared at the doorway leading to the dark hallway with a scared expression. She pointed towards it with a shaking hand and whispered, "There's something there." I heard something move against the wall in the hallway. At that moment, my heart sank, and I had never felt fear like that in my life. I felt it in my soul that we might be in the midst of a home invasion. My heart raced, I felt like I was going to be sick, and my mind raced with thoughts about how we could protect the baby in his room when we'd have to get past whoever was there to reach him. Then, the source of our fear tumbled into the bedroom. It was her cat playing with a gigantic moth. Story 36. I was in the hospital for a nosebleed that would not stop. I walked into the bathroom around 2 a.m., and while I was washing my hands, blood started coming out of my nose, mouth, and eyes. I ran in and got my mom's attention, as she was asleep, and it began a 20-minute struggle for air and consciousness. The last thing I remember was hearing one of the emergency response team members say we have to intubate or we're going to lose her. I remember seeing my grandmother, who had passed away about 8 years before. I have a rare form of vasculitis called eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis, and my issues have centered on the arteries in my face. I have undergone numerous embolisms to stop it and have had many surgeries at Duke University Hospital. I'm generally stable now, but I often wonder what it will feel like to know I'm dying again and that there is very little they can do to save me. Story 37. I was on vacation in Croatia, playing with a girl on the beach. I think we were 7 or 8 years old. We were looking at pretty shells. Suddenly, she ran towards her parents and then just fell to the ground. My dad was a firefighter and did everything he could, but she was gone before she hit the sand. Medics said it was an aneurysm. If by any chance her family sees this, know that we think and speak of you and her often. That day left a mark on all of us. Story 38. When I was 16, I saw a guy push his girlfriend to the ground while hanging out with a male coworker at a park. I tried to get my coworker to check what was going on, but he didn't want to get involved, which was understandable. Then the guy punched her right in the face, and my coworker asked what was wrong. The guy yelled at him, so I asked the girl if she was okay, and she said she was fine and to just leave them alone. She didn't look fine. That's when I realized how real and terrifying domestic abuse is. Story 39. When we went on a bus trip to Atlantic City right after graduation, we encountered a car accident as we passed through the toll booths. The driver of the Corvette had been decapitated. As we approached the accident, we all looked out the bus windows and saw his head about 10 feet from the back of his car. I have never forgiven myself for being nosy. I wish I had never looked at it. Story 40. I was a child in the cancer ward. There was a few days old baby that came in with cancer. My mom, being the kind person she is, told the parents to go and get a coffee and just sit for a while. They left the baby with us. The baby started to whimper, so my mom picked her up and walked around to calm her down. Then mom paused, ran to the baby's room, and rang the bell 3 times. The emergency cart arrived with several nurses. The room was too small to close the door while they did their best to bring the little girl back. I remember the dread and fear of what I was witnessing. I understood what was happening, but my young mind didn't fully grasp it. This experience stayed with me for life, and from that young age, I knew I didn't want that to happen to my own children because of the fear that it could happen to them. Story 41. Looking at the dog who spent 6 years by my side every minute of every day, monitoring my health and seeing her chest still. She died on Sunday morning. I am fighting so hard to stay here with a huge piece of my soul missing. Feels like if I just walk far enough and look hard enough, I'll find her. I told her to wait for me and take me wherever is next. I don't know if I regret that or not, because now I just want to go find her. Story 42. I got drunk at a hotel bar with a large man wearing a cowboy hat and duster in Wichita, Kansas. Walking outside to go to my room, we smoked a cigarette and he talked about his big rig and how he had a whole setup inside. I was converting a van, so I asked if I could check out the inside. We walked to the dark part of the parking lot where his truck was, and I, being a large guy, wasn't nervous at all. He unlocked it and said I could check it out. As I was about to step up, an intense fear washed over me. I looked back and saw him pulling a blackjack out of his pocket. I jumped sideways off the step and ran. He yelled, "What's the matter, bud?" I didn't call the police because I wasn't hurt, and I felt embarrassed. Not even 4 months later, he was on television, arrested for being a serial killer, possibly the serial killer known as Dr. No, the scariest thing I ever saw was his eyes. There was death in them when I turned around. I felt the whole world change for a split second. It's the oddest thing. I'm a 50-year-old man, and it still gives me chills. His name is Samuel Legg if you want to look him up. Story 43. I came home from wrestling practice at age 15 to find my dad on the floor. He had a stroke and only half of his body was functioning. Seeing his face drooping on one side and witnessing him in such a state was frightening. I called the ambulance against his wishes. He told me he didn't want to make a big fuss. I had to call them back to ask them not to turn on the siren or their lights, as he didn't want to alert the neighbors. He passed away a couple of days later in the intensive care unit. When I was about 10 or 11, I stumbled upon a man who had committed suicide in his car. From what I can recall, my memory hasn't suppressed. He had a pistol in his hand and a wound on his temple. There was dried blood and brain matter all over the passenger side of the car. I didn't really know how to process it. I just went to the local courthouse and told a police officer. Then they took me home and informed my parents what I had found so they could console me. I will never get the sight of that gore out of my head. Story 44. I had a woman tailgating me closer than I've ever experienced before. She swerved around me into one of those lanes that merges onto the highway from an on-ramp. This one was particularly long. She was speeding over 100 miles per hour easily. She didn't have a spot to merge in before the flatbed truck that was sitting on the shoulder after the lane disappeared, and then I witnessed her car go underneath the flatbed despite the safety bar, and the entire top of the car was gone in a flash. The truck driver was tying something down, I think, and thankfully saw it coming and ran back towards the cab before the collision. I've seen a handful of accidents that involved impaired drivers, T-bones, and rollovers before that I stopped to assist with. This one, I thought, nope, that is going to scar me for a long time, and I just kept driving. There was no way the woman was alive. Story 45. Being ambushed by terrorists in a remote area, they had blocked the road at night. A few weeks earlier, They had stopped a bus full of passengers in the same area and killed everyone. Story 46. Driving through California with my boyfriend years ago, in the middle of the night, he suddenly said, "Babe, don't look. Just don't look." We drove past a body that had been hit by a big transport truck. One half resembled a tire track, while the other looked like the length of a human body with all its clothes mostly torn off. I looked, of course. Story 47. I saw my friend fall off a cliff right in front of me. I was standing near the edge looking over, and he came walking up a little too fast, lost his traction on a gravelly patch, and his momentum carried him over. I saw the whole thing unfold in a kind of slow motion, but it also happened too quickly for me to do anything, and when he went over, we were making eye contact and I could see the fear on his face. I remember it vividly about 15 years later. To be clear, he totally survived and is now married with a child. He ended up with a bad concussion and severe bruising over his whole body, but fortunately, nothing life-changing. Story 48. A serious car accident occurred in front of me on the road. Thankfully, everyone turned out to be okay, but it was terrifying at the moment. Story 49. The ice storms we recently experienced in northern Michigan were, I believe, the first time in my life and even in my parents' lives that the area was hit by a massive natural disaster. Some of the line crew members who have done hurricane repairs said this damage resembled that of a Category 5 hurricane. Hundreds of power poles were broken, thousands of trees were destroyed, and a 600-foot radio tower was brought down. Driving into town feels eerie, and I can't even get gas for my generator. I hope I never witness something like this again. I saw a historic picture from 1908 of a storm that looked similar, so I hope this is a once-in-a-100-year event. Story 50. The aftermath of a train hitting a teenager. He thought he was clever riding his bike across the tracks to beat an oncoming freight train. There was a fast-moving Amtrak on the next track traveling at 80 miles per hour that he did not know was approaching. One of the officers said, "The trail starts here," referring to the bloody skid mark that was all that remained of him. Story 51. When I was in 4th grade waiting for the bus, I saw another 4th grader get hit by a truck pulling a trailer. He flew at least 15 feet. We all stood there shocked. Our bus pulled up, and someone who witnessed it was holding up the child's shoe to tell the bus driver. I thought for sure he was dead. He came back to school the next week and definitely had nightmares for a while. Story 52. Mine is probably not as bad as half the posts I've seen here, but I witnessed a possible gang kidnapping in broad daylight. To elaborate, I was an 8th grade student at the time. I was waiting for the bus to arrive so I could attend a tutoring class that evening. There was a road next to the bus stop that notoriously led to a local gang area. A bus came from that road, turned onto the main road, and stopped at my bus stop so people could get on. That's when it happened. About a dozen motorcycles and 3-wheelers came from that road, with people carrying wooden planks and homemade swords. They got on the bus, grabbed a kid who looked around 17 years old, beat him up, dragged him out of the bus, placed him on one of the 3-wheelers, and then went back down the same road. This happened in broad daylight. The area wasn't abandoned or anything. People saw everything, but I guess they knew better than to get involved. There have been other, scarier events like the Easter bombings, but this was the one I experienced all alone. Story 53. I don't consider it scary, and I'm not really sure what to think of it, but it's probably the only story I have that even somewhat fits. I think the unsettling part is how easy and effortless it was for the man when the time came. My mom used to send me news articles all the time about cars driving off the side of a mountain that was part of my commute, as well as people committing suicide by jumping off an overpass I routinely crossed. I'm not sure if it was meant to scare me into taking a different route or what, but one day, I'm driving over the overpass and see a car parked on the side, and I think, oh no, it's one of those articles. I drive by the car and notice there's a person in it just sitting there. I'm not sure what my plan was, but I immediately pulled over and parked about 50 to 75 feet in front of their car. In my rearview mirror, I saw the person open their door and get out, so my reaction was, oh no, and I got out. I turned around just in time to see the man grab the side of the overpass and hop over. I jogged to where he had been standing and looked over. He had hit the ground and died on impact, as evidenced by the blood everywhere. I had to call emergency services and deal with that, but to this day, one of the most vivid parts of that experience that I remember is that cars were driving by and honking. Nobody stopped, but lots of people honked. I still think it's strange that so many people were honking as they drove by. The worst part was when the police officer showed up and tried to open his door, but it was locked. He then went around to the driver's side and unlocked the car. He told me to try to open the passenger door, and it opened. Then he asked me to turn off the music, which was blasting. I grabbed the person's phone, and the moment I picked it up, it started ringing. I remember the name Caesar popping up, and I thought, damn, he's never going to reach the person he's calling. The officer grabbed it and answered, but Caesar hung up almost immediately. I feel like that event had no impact on me, and I just went about life as normal, but I do think about it all the time. My sister is an emergency medical technician, so we joke about the things we've seen, but I don't really share this story with people because they're generally more spooked than I ever was. It's been almost 11 years now. What a time. Story 54. As a teenager, I was getting ready for bed when the police decided to raid my house because my brother had stolen some expensive golf clubs and other items, as far as I understood. Story 55. Not as bad as the others, but it has always stuck with my family, and it's interesting seeing both sides of it. When I was about 10, my older brother, my dad, and I were putting up the new wire for the electric fence with our backs to the trees. It was a normal day, cows roaming the pasture, our goat and dogs running around. Then we heard a gunshot. Dad pushed us to the ground and shouted, "Who's there?" It was Mr. Barnes, a cousin of a friend's dad. Dad got up and saw Mr. Barnes with his shotgun facing us. For context, while my dad is an avid hunter, it is well known that he does not do or allow it on our farm, where we have cows, dogs, goats, and, of course, kids running around. It was a tragedy waiting to happen. Dad was understandably annoyed and told him to take his hunting elsewhere, as he does not allow it on our property. Then it got worse. Mr. Barnes said he was not trying to hunt, but was attempting to get that mountain lion near our kids. He pointed to Snowball, our guard dog, who was very close to us and mostly white with black, not mountain lion colored. This meant he not only could not see well, but deliberately pointed his gun toward not only other people, but my dad's children. Dad lost it. I talk about him a lot on my account. Our dad is enormous. People actually turn their heads when they see him, but we usually do not really notice it. It's just Dad. It becomes normal. Every day we live with this huge guy. That day served as a reminder of what he could do if he lost control. He ripped the gun from Mr. Barnes' hands, put it on the ground, and proceeded to literally pick up this grown man and shake him like I could shake a doll. Red-faced, he screamed at him that he could have killed his kids. "What is wrong with you, you lunatic? You cannot tell the difference between a white dog and a mountain lion? You pointed a gun at my kids and pulled the trigger?" Dad was not much of a swearer, especially not a profane one. I had never seen him so enraged before or after that. After screaming at him for a while, Dad threw him down, said he was confiscating the gun, and would have a word with the sheriff. We quickly saw Dad's side of things because he was obviously right. But it was terrifying for us kids, as we saw just how powerful Dad could be. He was capable of picking up another grown man, and we stood no chance if he ever became that angry with us. He had used his size and strength before, shortly after he had put the fear of God into my older brother for beating me up. But he was clearly holding back and was in control. He was making a point to Mr. Barnes that he may be bigger, but Dad was in my corner, and he was significantly bigger than my brother. It is like when your dog overpowers you. The lovable creature turns into a wild animal. You face the reality that you would be completely helpless if they turned on you. That is why it was scary for us. It overshadowed the being shot at part, as absurd as that is. Meanwhile, Dad was entirely focused on that aspect. He did not know we felt that way until it came up a few months later. I am happy to report that he never became that aggressive toward us and had a genuine conversation about it with us. He did not call us stupid, said he had never thought about it from that angle, and understood why we were scared. He told us about a time when he and our grandpa had a disagreement that almost turned physical. Grandpa, being the dad of that generation, told Dad to come outside and prove he was the man he thought he was. Except, while Dad is enormous, Grandpa is actually pretty normal-sized. They did not get too far into it, just kind of in that angry, posturing stage when Grandma called them white trash and told them to go back inside. But Grandpa later told Dad that was when he realized Dad was bigger than him. The old, "I can still put you over my knee / get the belt" thing was no longer effective. He recognized that he probably would have been laid out by his 15-year-old son if that fight had actually happened. He had noticed the size difference, but that was the first time he truly saw it. Like how we would 20-some years later. From then on, they tried to get along better and made sure to teach Dad to keep his hands to himself and control his anger. Dad is great. He may be a little rougher than what would be acceptable in today's society, but he learned that he could not act as his generation was raised. He learned a remarkable level of pantomiming to communicate with me, as I have brain damage. He was our biggest fan and was always there for us, no matter how exhausted he was. But that day served as a stark reminder of what could happen otherwise. Story 56. Scary to varying degrees and in different ways. The sight of the restraints on my wrists and ankles to a hospital gurney with no recollection of how I got there or why I was restrained. The sight of my cousin having self-harmed badly and bleeding on the floor. I was 8, she was 13. My mother's scream was palpable. The look on an old friend's face after she came outside her house upon finding her father hanging in the garage. We were 5 or 6. She never really recovered from it. The scream of the older sister who was watching us is another I'll never forget. The Trilene hastily approaching below a steep embankment at about 50 miles per hour after a turn gone wrong. The corpse of a friend who was like a little brother to me. He was only 22 and in incredible shape. An unimaginable waste of a wonderful young person. The fragility of life. Kensington, Philadelphia. The only place I've stepped over multiple corpses to get a can of soda at the corner store. If you know, you know. Story 57. A man who was bleeding profusely from multiple open wounds came into the store I was operating to steal basic first aid supplies. I wasn't scared for myself. I was concerned about the state of the world we live in. This was the second time I had someone in a potentially life-threatening condition ask me not to call emergency services for fear of their medical bills. Story 58. Being inside a waterspout in Ocean City, Maryland, when my kids were 3 years old was an unforgettable experience. It made landfall right where we were staying, and since there are no basements, I remember hovering closely over them and trying not to panic because I didn't want them to know or see what was happening. Story 59. I've had a few traumatic experiences, including drug abuse, murder, and suicide. My brother had just been discharged from a mental health ward despite being severely psychotic. I urged them not to let him out. After talking to shadow people in the car, he jumped out the door with superhuman strength and speed. I ran after him as he launched himself off an overpass onto a major road. Fortunately, he survived, but not without a significant brain injury and many broken bones. I can't believe he's still able to walk and talk after what happened. The way his skull was broken, his brain fluid leaking from his ear, still stays with me. I can't do my first aid refresher without experiencing flashbacks whenever we discuss head and spinal injuries. Another traumatic event was watching my dad overdose on heroin when I was 11. He was on weekend visits as he was transitioning out of jail. I saw my mom perform CPR on him, and I was the one who had to call the ambulance. He was blue. My sister once attempted to run over my other brother in a car with her young children in the back seat. I also remember a horrifying incident when I was 11. Our neighbor across the road committed a murder-suicide by gassing himself and his girlfriend in their car. My mom got the idea to do the same with my 3 younger siblings and me. She got a hose, locked the doors and windows, and drove us out into the bush. She checked her phone to ensure there was no reception. Then she put the garden hose in the exhaust and started feeding it through the window. I pleaded with her to stop, and somehow I convinced her not to go through with it. My family is a bit dysfunctional. Yes, I've done a lot of therapy because of these issues. These are just the major events I remember. There is plenty of other trauma as well. Story 60. My husband received an injection from the doctor, And when he came home, he passed out while standing the next day. It was the scariest minute of my life. I had never screamed like that before. I kept thinking, we are only 28 and 29. He can't pass away. And I didn't know what to do other than shake him. He wouldn't respond and wasn't moving. Thankfully, he woke up and has been fine since. This was 2 years ago. But I truly hope that never happens again. It was such a helpless feeling. Story 61. My dog was trying very hard to be his usual excited self after what we assume was a massive seizure or stroke while I was at work. Picking me up from work was the highlight of his day, and he tried to greet me, but could only barely manage it because his balance was completely off. I received kisses, of course, and he was wiggling as much as he could. All I could do was cry and apologize because there was nothing I could do to help him. The emergency veterinarian wanted $3,000 to diagnose what was wrong and wouldn't accept payments. I couldn't afford that, and I didn't qualify for anything like care credit. At 7:35 p.m. on July 24, 2022, his heart stopped when the veterinarian euthanized him. It was the worst moment of my life, and I had never felt so helpless and terrified in the hours leading up to it. Even now, I still get choked up thinking about it. Story 62. My mom, lifeless and dead, is way up there. There was also a time when I woke up to my dad calling an ambulance for her, even before that incident when she tried to commit suicide by overdosing. I struggled with suicidal thoughts for much of my life, but after witnessing that, I decided to do my best to manage my feelings. Story 63. I had to call for assistance with my son, who was experiencing a mental health emergency. Being held back as officers approached him with guns drawn was a paralyzing terror I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Story 64. Barrel of a gun. I have seen it twice and always received a candid explanation from it. However, it doesn't make it any less scary. The first time I was land surveying and had found the property pin. I was able to say, "Sir, I am not on your land. The boundary is here, where I tied this tape to the pin." The second time, I sneaked out from my grandmother's house to smoke and look at the stars near an abandoned gas station. A man stopped his truck, confronted me, and I told him, "I'm Wendell's new wife's grandson. She doesn't know I smoke, so I came here because I recently moved to Atlanta, and we don't really see the stars out there." I saw that same man who pulled a gun on me during Thanksgiving. It turned out he was my cousin by marriage. He might also be my nephew, but I didn't inquire further about it. Story 65. An olive green SUV stalked me throughout the city I lived in for months. The driver would circle blocks, make U-turns, and drive recklessly in an attempt to corner me. On one occasion, I was close enough to home to have my male housemate come to save me with his gun. Most of the time, I had to hide under random cars or behind walls and bushes. It became so unsafe to take public transit in that city due to that SUV that I moved out of my hometown entirely and have never returned. The driver followed me to work and home every day. I sometimes took longer routes to try to lose him, getting on different buses and trains to needlessly extend my journey. One night, I stayed on the bus all night, afraid to get off. The SUV tailgated the bus all night long, and when I finally got off in the morning, there he was trying to snatch me. I had many moments where I believed I would die at this man's hands and my body would be lost, never to be seen again. One night, my phone died. A friend had invited me over, but my phone had died, and they didn't answer the door no matter how much I rang. I was trapped outside, and the SUV was right there, driving up and down that side street waiting for me. I hid under a short brick wall and then sprinted to the nearest main street like I had never sprinted in my life. The SUV followed me onto the major street, making U-turns back and forth right in front of me. I kept sprinting until I reached the first person I saw. The street was completely empty except for an older woman waiting at a bus stop. She saved my life by staying by my side and ensuring I got onto the bus safely. Nothing could ever scare me as much as that olive green SUV. It also had a blanket with triangles covering its back window, and its windows were tinted. I remember it all. Story 66. I visited Ypres as a teenager, and one day we went to Hill 62 in Sanctuary Wood. In the museum, there are some very graphic but important photographs on display. The one that I can still picture is of a soldier who had lost the bottom half of his face, likely from shelling or artillery, perhaps even shrapnel. His mouth, nose, and everything had been blown off. It not only shocked me at the time, but also emphasized how truly horrific war is and can be. Story 67. I have mild schizophrenia. I don't need medication, and I can tell what is real and what is not. My only episode was horrifying. I walked out of my bedroom to use the bathroom, and in the hallway, every single doorway had heads and hands crawling out of each door. Story 68. I was about 6 years old when I woke up to my mom sobbing in our living room while watching television. I stood next to her as we watched the second plane hit. Story 69. When I was little, I was on an escalator. A woman in front of me reached down to grab her purse that she had dropped, and her long braid got caught in the machinery. I remember blood, and the woman and everyone else on the escalator screaming. Story 70. Being in a remote work camp with wildfires closing in, my camp days are numbered. I fear. I'm scarred. The sensation of sitting up at night watching thousands of dry lightning strikes in the vast forest, somewhere with no Wi-Fi or cell service, while waiting to see smoke or fire will haunt me until I die. When the fire jumped the lake in Kelowna. Story 71. I almost saw a man beat his wife while in a drunken rage after a Texas Rangers game. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. Story 72. I saw a concentration camp in Israel for Palestinians, complete with guard towers, machine gun posts, and razor wire, but the people inside were families, men, women, and many little children. Permanently changed my opinion of Israel. Story 73. Walking into my best friend's living room late at night after partying, I saw her dog with its head stuck between the bars of its cage. It was scared of the lightning and thunder from a severe storm. The dog was trembling and hyperventilating, and in its struggle, it accidentally broke its neck. Its mouth was wide open and its eyes were filled with fear. She was such a beautiful dog. Story 74. The willful ignorance and desire to harm others among a significant portion of the population. Story 75. My girlfriend committed suicide during an argument. We were yelling at each other from different rooms. I was in the living room and she was in the bedroom. Technically, it was over our breakup. Although I know we would have worked it out, she said she was leaving. I thought she meant leaving my apartment. I said okay, goodbye, and then I heard a gunshot. She shot herself in the head with a .45 caliber handgun I kept in my underwear drawer. After the shot rang out, I went into the bedroom to find her slumped over. The room had a strong smell of gunpowder. I called emergency services immediately, and she was pronounced deceased shortly after their arrival. I was interrogated for 2 hours until the medical examiner declared her wound was self-inflicted. That was easily the worst day of my life. I still carry this with me to this day. She passed away in mid-June 2019. May she rest in peace. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.